A country in the North Atlantic the size of Alabama that somehow took over the world and ruled it with decency unmatched by any empire in human history. The British Empire was not perfect, but it was far more humane than any other, ever. It's gone now, barely even remembered. Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain.
That as of Tuesday or Wednesday would have loved George Washington and the founders of America. Now they're filthy rebel scum who separated us from the greatest empire ever to grace the face of Earth. And look, we're going to give you the actual historic facts about the good and the bad of the British Empire, but he's not interested in that. He's interested in whitewashing, genocide, slavery, concentration camps, famine, and more, as he'll do in this clip.
In the real world, the one that we live in, strong countries dominate weak countries, and that trend shows no sign of changing. So despite what they may be claiming on Twitter tonight, the British Empire was more than just genocide. In fact, the British did not commit genocide, except arguably against the Dutch during the Boer War. The British did give the world the Magna Carta, and habeas corpus, and free speech. They helped end the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the ritual murder of widows in India. The British Empire spread Protestant Christianity to the entire world.
There are so many hilarious Tucker Carlson-y flourishes there. So he will only acknowledge genocide if it's against white people. That's the only time that it can exist. In the same way that in a later part of the clip, he will acknowledge that a political leader could be racist, but it has to be the black president of an African nation. That's the only time they can be racist. Other than that, they're more than just genocide. Is he not merciful that he briefly alluded to the possibility that they had killed many, many people, while then going on to give them credit for ending the transatlantic slave trade that they enthusiastically participated in and made bank on for hundreds of years? Man, this dude loves participation trophies when it's to empires.
Yeah. So this is actually a really important segment because it has two things that Tucker Carlson's doing, and they're both dangerous. So first, what he's doing here is supporting the monarchy. And you might think, well, Queen Elizabeth died. It was a white Western empire, and so he's nostalgic about it, right? No. He's had Curtis Yarvin on his show. So did I. I wanted to see what this right-wing philosopher was talking about. And Curtis is in favor of a monarchy. And he calls it a monarchy because it sounds a little bit better than a dictator, because that's what it is. It's a dictator. And so, but Tucker Carlson had Curtis on to agree with him. So there's a very, very big difference. And so he's been quoting him. Steve Bannon's been quoting Curtis Yarvin, and so have Peter Thiel, Blake Masters, J.D. Vance. So they are enamored with the idea of America turning back into being ruled by a monarchy, i.e. a dictator, i.e. a right-wing dictator. So that was an ode to dictatorship that you just saw there. And by the way, literally, you can't argue with it. That's what the empire was, and that is what he's celebrating, okay? So now, the second part of what he did there was classic racism. Now, you guys, if you're like professors in the area, you might know it. If you're really well-educated, you might know it. Most people are going to miss it. But this is, if you study the history of Western colonization and imperialism, saying, well, the empire might have taken all of your natural resources and subjugated you and made you work for it, but you're way better off because we brought you civilization. You were savages before us. Why were you savages? Look at you. You're dark. You're brown, you're black. And Tucker does that all the time, and he did it in this segment. He talked about how the British had built the greatest building in India, and it was a train station, and India's built nothing like that ever since. Well, before then, they did build the Taj Mahal several hundred years earlier. That was pretty spectacular. One of the most spectacular buildings in the world. Funny enough, Tucker didn't mention that. Although the building is white. So you would think that he would have liked it. But white people didn't build it, so that was left out, okay? So when it came to the Africa, he's like, dictators rule the place. Well, what the hell's a queen? What the hell's a king? It's a dictator. When it's a white dictator that's ruling over brown and black people, It's awesome and the most benign empire ever. When it's black people ruling themselves, they're no good, dirty dictators. And guys, this is not without context. This is exactly what empires have been saying for hundreds of years. And then, just so you're absolutely clear, he said the second part, which is we brought them Protestant Christianity. What else could they want? These savages. We brought them our civilized religion. It is Empire 101. And John, funny enough, he didn't seem to talk about the raping or the pillaging at all.
No raping, no pillaging. He admitted that they had done something bad in being mean to the Dutch, which they very much were, very bad to those Dutch settlers. Dutch settlers committed all sorts of their own crimes. That's the only time he'll acknowledge that they did something wrong, was when it's to someone else that he codes as white. Then it's acceptable. But no, the famines that they willingly initiated that led to the deaths of millions, no. The wars that they started, whether for colonization, for just domination of an area, or to maintain trade access, as in China with the Opium Wars, nope, that's not worth actually mentioning. Either he doesn't know, which I find very plausible. I don't think he's nearly as smart as most people think, or he just doesn't think that you need to know, because his goal in covering this wasn't even the goal that it very easily could have been. If he was as triggered by people celebrating the death of the Queen, as he implied he was at the beginning of the segment, he could have just defended her, or he could have just defended what Britain did during her reign. That's not what he did. He decided that he was going to defend, in an ahistoric way, the entirety of the British Empire back hundreds of years. And he did it for the reasons that you said. It is to reinforce to his audience that dictatorship is better and more effective and more productive than democracy, and white supremacy makes sense. It's better for white people. It's also better for the non-white people that they conquer. That is explicitly what the message of that segment was. And it's no surprise that other right-wing pundits are, following after him, trying to do the same thing. Charlie Kirk, who, if it's possible, knows less about history than Tucker Carlson, he did it. I'm not even sure that it's worth going to, but this is an opportunity for them to reinforce to their audience that democracy is bad, multiracial democracy is worse.
Yeah. So real quick, two more things here. Now, this is a different empire, very similar tactics, though. When the conquistadors took over the Aztec Empire, what they did is they would bring up Aztecs one by one onto the top of a hill, and they would ask them in Spanish, a language they did not understand, do you take Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? Because they would bring them beautiful, beautiful Christianity that would civilize them. And when they didn't answer because they don't speak Spanish, they said, oh, I guess they're rejecting Jesus Christ, and they would chop their heads off because they were savages. Because the Aztecs were savages, so the Spanish were forced to chop their heads off on behalf of beautiful, merciful Christianity. And that's what Tucker Carlson is celebrating tonight. So, look, we're going to get into, let me give you a list of the crimes of the British Empire. If we went into all of them, it would take hours and hours and hours. But the first and second Opium Wars, which I'm going to come back to, the Boer concentration camps, the Armistice massacre, the resettlement of Chinese people in Malaysia, the invasion of Tibet, torture centers in Yemen, the Cyprus internment campaign, the brutal crushing of the Iraqi rebellion, the Bengal famine, let alone everything they did in India, okay? And look, hold on, let me actually walk that back for a second. We're way more balanced than Tucker Carlson. So I'm not telling you that the British Empire was only bad. No. There's one or two things he said that were correct. They did do the Magna Carta, and they did bring us habeas corpus until the Bush administration destroyed it. Okay, and Tucker Carlson celebrated it when we were destroying habeas corpus, saying that the detainees in Guantanamo Bay shouldn't have it. They were trying to knock down a pillar of actual great Western civilization. Okay, so, and the British Empire did bring English to India, and it did have an ironic unifying effect. And they did bring bridges and railroads. All that is true. By the way, why did they build the bridges and the railroads? Out of the goodness of their heart? No, to move the product that they have stolen from India. Okay, that's just but it did help in the long run. So that is a well-rounded look at what the British Empire did. But I'm just going to give you one details on the Opium Wars. And this is another plague that Britain unleashed on us. But to be fair, it would have come no matter what. So they started corporations, them and the Dutch. And the British East India Company and other corporations wound up investing all over the world. And then speculation began. In the case of the Opium Wars, they had gotten companies, official British companies, had gotten a huge percent of the Chinese population addicted to opium because they were making money off of selling them opium. And China, having seen 40 million Chinese devastated by opium, said no more. We're making opium illegal. Britain, the British Empire, invaded them to make the selling of opium legal again because they were making money off the drug trafficking. They were the largest drug cartel in world history. They destroyed the lives of 40 million Chinese people on purpose for profit. And when the Chinese government wouldn't go along with it, they devastated the Chinese government, humiliated it, took Hong Kong, and subjugated it. That is what Tucker Carlson calls benign.